Embarking on this figure drawing project, one of the first things that we need to establish is, why are we here? What is the purpose for us actually studying the figure? Why are we making this drawing? What is important about this project that eventually is going to reveal something to us as students? Let's start with the philosophical aspect first. Why is drawing the human figure an interesting and informative activity for a student? One of the first and probably most obvious reasons really is because throughout all of history, figure drawing has been the cornerstone of the art student's education. Going back to the 19th century and looking at artists like Bouguereau and also artists like John Singer Sargent, Dagnan Bouveray, you name the 19th century painter that we know of, and that artist has studied the figure. They're sometimes more imaginative artworks. Look even further back and you simply have to say the name Michelangelo to understand that everything about the world of expression in visual arts can be addressed and understood through a focused and empathetic study of the human body. Harold Speed will even go as far as to say that the greater deal of expression in artwork actually comes from form rather than color. Now, while of course this is just an opinion, I think it's one to be taken also fairly seriously. Harold Speed, of course, being quite a heavyweight in the world of thinking and writing about drawing and painting. For our purposes here, our study of the human body is going to contain the essence of a few of our most foundational building blocks. Here, through the study of the human body, we can look at, in their essence, gesture, construction, proportion, and harmony. Our drawing process throughout this project then is going to be focused not so much on an aesthetic idea, but more coming from the very humble place where we simply want to draw to learn more about the human form. Throughout the course of these three phases of the drawing, I'll show how we first use line and construction to understand and really place the figure onto the paper in a sensible and practical way that allows us to work on our first steps towards eventual accuracy, which of course is going to be proportion. Then, through the language of shadow and light, we're going to explore the most substantial and essential features of the human body and how to organize our drawing to transmit those best to the viewer, but also to our own eye. Then in the final phase, through refining and modeling form, we will come eventually to the highest expression of this study, which is to look at light and form and the interaction in between those two. So at first, breaking the figure down into line segments and creating a kind of efficient marionette type illustration of the body, which focuses on the compartments in between articulations, which is to say, anywhere where the body bends, this is an articulation. If we travel proximally towards the body, we find the elbow, which is the next articulation. In between those two articulations, then we have the compartment of the forearm. Each part of the body, to one extent or another, can be broken down into this kind of conceptual model that offers us a lot of opportunity to make the kind of changes to the gesture and arrangement of the body that will be necessary in the first stage of the drawing. After this very simplified phase, we're then going to move into another stage of the drawing that will actually start to focus on what the body really is comprised of. Here we're going to be talking specifically about subcutaneous anatomy, which is to say the muscular forms directly beneath the skin. The study of these subcutaneous forms is a way that we can infuse our drawing with rationally connected anatomical forms and help us to cross-reference the more abstract and linear assumptions that we've made in our initial block-in. I want to pause for a moment and talk about a tool that I use when I want to track the rotation of the body and to indicate some of the interrelationships of anatomical features. The vertical center line that I use is highly abstract in one sense. What I like to do is actually start with the pit of the neck at the top of that center line and follow it down to the pubic symphysis at the bottom of that center line. The pit of the neck is a feature of the sternum, and the pubic symphysis is a feature of the pelvis. Both of these indicate a top and bottom of a center line of the torso. I add on to that the acromial ends of the clavicles and an outline of the clavicles themselves. In order to show the upper left and right hand sides of the pubic triangle, I indicate the anterior superior iliac spines. These are a feature of the pelvis. What the vertical center line is really good for here, in its inception, is to actually track the left and right rotation of the body by indicating distances to the left and right of that vertical center line. If the body rotates more to the right, there will be more distance from that center line to the left-hand contour than there will be on the right-hand side of the center line. The opposite, of course, will also be true. The rotation of the body then can be very easily indicated and adjusted by adjusting the location of the center line and its constituent anatomical features. I want to make sure that it's also stated very clearly in this introduction that this centerline is really a thing entirely of abstract conception. Though we can see the anatomical features that we are drawing these lines in between, there is not necessarily always a visual corollary to these relationships. They are useful in that the body is comprised of these rational connections in between physical forms that become much more easy to track at the early stages of a drawing when we draw these very abstract lines in between them. From a technical perspective, these lines should be made using a very light line quality that I reserve for things like notations that don't necessarily have a visual necessity, so I'm indicating them here as placeholders. Things that I know I want to track in order to be able to kind of control the construction and elaboration at this early stage of the pose, that nonetheless will be washed away as value begins to enter the picture. Wrapping up this phase of the drawing, I want to repeat again the mantra that we have had throughout this entire stage, which is to say, we're trying to make the simplest possible expression of the subject. We're going to stay away from details, and I'm going to focus on hopefully as big a picture as possible. When we use value, that value will also be simplified. So when we take a line segment, like the line down the left-hand side of the torso, and turn that into, instead of 10 angle breaks, 2 angle breaks, we're also going to do the same thing with our values. When we see a multiplicity of values across the form, we're going to squint down and do our best to see a simplified version of that value, and through that simplicity, we are going to be able to focus on big problems, larger changes in proportion and gesture and construction than we will be liking to make in a much later stage of the drawing. Another caution I want to remind you of at this stage is the role that the anatomical notations that you took earlier on should be easing into now. Remember, at their inception, the anatomical indications we made were highly in the abstract. We had a drawing that was really devoid of value, and we were using line to help create a rational model of structure within the contours. Now that we have transitioned into this latter stage at the beginning, those more abstract indications should be taking on a much more visual manifestation. So what used to be a light linear notation is now transformed into a sensible value shape that is helping to indicate a very specific and simplified form. There's going to be so much interesting stuff to investigate in the second and third phases of this drawing, so now we will call this the conclusion of the block-in phase and move on to value, structure, and form.